Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's a beautiful day here in the Sonoran Desert, and I just wanted to take a moment and share with you a really neat technique. This technique can be used anywhere, but if you live in an arid location, such as a desert or the Sonoran Desert, which we are here in Tucson, this technique can be especially helpful for you, especially if you're just starting a new plot of land and you've got a lot of open space. This technique you can use to build soil over time, but while you're in that process of building soil, you can actually use this as a raised bed to plant annuals that will just take hold and receive all the fertility that these beds have to offer. So stick with me here and let me introduce you to what's called Hugelkultur. So you may be asking yourself, what is Hugelkultur? Well, Hugelkultur is a German word, and Hugel just means mound or hill, and then culture is just like our word culture. So it just means mound or hill culture. And it was used by the Germans as well as other societies in Europe, and it was more or less like an oral tradition, just a technique that was passed down from generation to generation on a specific way of gardening. And if you really look into mound culture, you actually see it throughout the world. Natives used mound culture for centuries, and they would use it as a place to worship or to hide their trash and debris, essentially composting in place. And so it's just a technique that has been adopted and passed down over the centuries, and it's a fantastic means to garden. And so, as I mentioned, it's more or less just a way of composting in place. It's a way of making use of all the plant biomass material, all the logs and limbs and leaves, anything organic food waste that you could just essentially compost in place, make a huge pile, and just allow it to compost. And the finished product over many years is going to be a drought tolerant premium soil planting site. So you may be asking yourself, well, how do I go about making a hugel mound? What components and what inputs do I need to make a successful mound? Well, the really neat thing about it is there's no right or precise way. So you can pretty much use any materials that you have on site. And since there's no one way to make a hugel mound, each and every hugel mound is going to have differences in material, differences in shapes, sizes, depths. There also could be hugel pots, putting a plant biomass in the bottom of a pot, typically on a larger pot that's done on a 15-gallon or larger. I've seen and done myself. There could also be differences in slope of landscape or even the goals that you're trying to achieve on your property. Are you looking for a raised bed for annual use, or are you looking to perennialize a certain area down the road? So all these factors will go into how you want to shape your hugel mound, how large it will be, what materials you have to construct it, and then your overall goal or purpose for having the mound, whether it would be for annual or perennial use. Now, I was first initially inspired and drawn to hugelkultur primarily by the drought tolerance that it offers, as well as the soil creation. So here in the Sonoran Desert, we have a very heavy clay soil, a very tough soil with caliche layers, which is almost impenetrable. And so the soil creation, as well as the drought tolerance, is just a prime aspect of what I wanted to achieve here with my two hugel mounds. And so in the garden or landscape, a lot of the times we will have excess biomaterials, whether it be from tree trimmings or if you're cutting down trees in a new plot of land. Sometimes you need to clear and excavate. And so a lot of the times you can build up a lot of organic material. So you would need to ask yourself, what are the uses for all these tree limbs and branches and logs and excess biomaterial? Well, you could certainly chip them up into mulch, but you would need a chipper. And if you have a large amount of tree limbs, that can be a pretty daunting task. You could also use some of the leaves and smaller material in compost, but that would still leave you a lot of excess limbs and branches and so forth. And you could also use those to heat with a fireplace or for cooking, but the logs would need to be seasoned, and you would need to prioritize, if you do have a wood-burning fireplace, whether or not you would want to use that over other uses. And another use would be to make biochar. So those are all the various uses of logs and limbs. And so in this case, I'm going to offer you another possible use, which is hugelkultur, making a raised bed to plant in and to create excellent soil. Now, the best thing that you can do when you're making a new hugel mound is to start with old seasoned wood. And if you can find wood that's slightly decaying, that's just, kind of almost in that sponge-like material, that's a fantastic carbon to use. But, if you use new wood, if you were just to cut down a tree and to use those logs and limbs and branches within the hugel mound, you certainly could. But the issue with that is that there would be some nitrogen tie-up for maybe a year or two. And while that green wood is breaking down, it would tie up some nitrogen. So in that case, if all you've got is new wood, you would just want to supplement the mound with some nitrogen fertilizer a little bit more often than normal for the first couple of years, just to aid in the decomposition of the wood, limbs, and branches. Now, regarding the construction of the hugel, one factor is the log size. So the larger of the logs that you use, the more intact that the bed will stay over a longer period of time, and the longer that the mound will last before breaking down completely. So if you're looking to achieve a annual bed for a period of, between 3 to 5 years while you're creating soil, in my experience, it's best to use larger logs at the base, and then you could just work up from there using limbs and smaller branches. And then near the top, you would use the twigs and the leaves. And so after only a short few years, your mound will start collapsing and it will break down and become premium soil. So at that point, you can continue to add to the hugel by placing new logs and limbs on the mound or on the periphery of the mound while adding soil to the middle. And you could continue to build it up if you wanted to keep it as an annual bed. And in my experience, the beds do tend to sink between maybe a foot to 2 feet per year. So if you do want to perennialize it and to allow it to sink, it's going to take, between 3 to 5 years before it gets to the point where it has sunken completely, just depending on the wood size once again. One of the techniques when you're constructing your mound is to actually trench down into the soil first. You can trench down anywhere from 6 inches up to about 3 feet. And then you could actually use that soil that you've taken out of the ground to put atop the hugel mound once fully created. And what that'll do is it will allow the logs to be under the soil layer. And over time, those logs are going to decompose and turn into sponges, which is going to suck up all the moisture. And then when the bed starts to dry out, those logs will wick that moisture back up into the beds while the roots are eventually growing down into those logs and taking hold. So the longer the bed sits, the better the roots and the soil, as well as the logs, will all interact together to make it a drought-tolerant bed. And when I first made my hugel mounds, I did mulch the tops of the mounds themselves with about 3 to 4 inches of wood chip mulch. And so once I mulched them, to actually plant in, what I would do is I would just scoop away the mulch from the top of the mound. And then once I had the opening, I would just fill that opening with soil and whatever plant that I planned to plant into the top of the hugel mound. And then I would just cover that area once I planted it with mulch once again. I remember the first year that I actually planted in the hugel mound, and I really wasn't expecting a whole lot just because it was such a fresh construction, and some of the wood that I used was actually green wood, so I wasn't expecting a whole lot, but I was just astounded at the fertility. I had planted spaghetti squash the first year, and it was just a phenomenal harvest. I forget exactly how many, but I think I had like 3 or 4 vines, and out of those vines I had over 100 fruit. So it was just an incredible harvest year one, and at that point I was just completely sold. And if you are in an arid location, once you have your hugel mound established and set up, it will need supplemental waterings, especially if you are in an arid location, as I said, for the first couple years until that wood really starts breaking down and until it can actually hold on or absorb the water. So don't be surprised if you have to water it on a regular basis for the first few years. But after that, once it becomes more mature and established, the wood starts to decompose, it will hold on to that water and it will just become more and more drought tolerant over time. So hugel mounds offer so many options, so many benefits, and they are just a phenomenal technique to implement and use, especially for the soil creation and the drought tolerance. Now, are hugel beds completely drought proof? No. Are they drought tolerant? Perhaps. That would be a variable depending on the construction, whether or not it was trenched out, the age of the wood, whether or not that wood is actually holding water. Do you live in an area that receives adequate rainfall every year, or are you in the Sonoran Desert? And did you build the hugel bed on contour? Does the hugel bed also have an accompanying swale? And is it in full sun or part shade? So all these factors will have an impact on the water retention and capability, holding capability of the bed itself. And each one of these factors will have an impact on the bed. And so I just wanted to share all those various aspects and all the aspects that would contribute to more of a drought tolerant bed. And so I have both of my hugel beds in full sun. They are both trenched. I trenched mine both. I trenched one to 6 inches, and then I trenched the other one, I think, to about 1.5 feet. And I did have to water mine for the first couple of years, just until they were established and the wood was able to hold on to water. But once that happened and once it occurred, I saw a dramatic increase in the drought tolerance of the bed, as well as the overall fertility. It's just bar none. I've never seen the kind of fertility come through this type of technique, and it is just something that should be looked at for every serious gardener and garden. So what more can I say? Hugelkultur is just a really neat concept. It's a really neat technique that you can use at home to create black gold garden soil with very little effort besides the upfront construction. And over the course of a number of years, it'll become more drought tolerant and just give you a better planting site. It gets better with age, just like wine. And so go ahead and give it a try if you haven't. And so if you found anything of value in the video today, I would surely appreciate you smashing that like button, as well as sharing this video with friends, family, anybody that you know that may want to grow more food at home. And if you've tried Hugelkultur, or if you're interested in it, let me know your experiences down below in the comments, or any questions that you may have. And so once again, thanks for giving me your most precious asset, which is your time. And I surely appreciate you checking out this video, as well as this channel. Many green thumbs, and God bless you. Take care.